Actually, I wasn't going to start with this. I'm now going to start with it. We'll get into the presentation in just a second, but when I was listening to you, I was thinking and getting more and more nervous, right? So immediately what comes to mind is a story a principal told me a couple weeks ago. She said, I wasn't interested in this stuff, but I was driving my 8-year-old home, my second grader home from school, and we stopped. She wanted to stop and go to McDonald's. Now the 8-year-old, had been in a school that had introduced PATHS, a curriculum that includes social and emotional learning. So the 8-year-old says, Mommy, I want to stop and get French fries at McDonald's. She said, no, we can only go once a week, not today. So the 8-year-old starts screaming and yelling and spitting and kicking, and she's in the car seat all strapped in, having a tantrum. And the mom keeps driving along, and all of a sudden the back seat goes silent. Mom's like, did she have a seizure or something? What's going on back there? All of a sudden, and she turns around at the red light. She mentioned that. It was a red light when she turned around. And she sees her 8-year-old all with her arms around her shoulders and her head down and her chin on her chest. And she says, honey, what are you doing? And the 8-year-old looks up and says, Mom, I'm doing the turtle. And she says, what's that? She says, Mom, don't you know? A turtle is when we calm down, deep breathe, and realize that our stress shouldn't control our lives. So the principal says, in that moment, I decided I was in favor of social and emotional learning in classrooms. So, since I was just turtling while you were talking, I'm going to invite you each to turtle. Now we're going to do a second exercise, not in the script, and therefore going to take me over time, but hopefully not too much. Second exercise, you just did a little thank you for sitting next to me exercise. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds of silence, during which you can either physically, if you feel like your young child within you can come out in this professional setting, and if you don't want to wrap yourself up like a turtle, you don't have to. I just want you to think of some issue that's causing you stress today, right now. Oh, yeah, it was like, need more time? But I want you to think of one you're willing to share with your neighbor. So just 10 seconds to pull to mind something that you're managing right this minute that may be causing you a little bit of an elevated stress level. Okay, are you willing to play along? Will you pair up and do a turn taking? One person speaks, the other listens. Just very short, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then we'll switch. The other person speaks, the other person listens. And if you've got 3, feel free to go in 3s, and if you've got 1, come forward and you can share with me. Okay, go ahead. So this is helpful for 2 reasons. Just let me invite you to recognize what just happened. So first of all, the first thing you had to do was do an internal exercise, right? We had a very quick exercise where you had to check in with yourself. Even if you were distracted, even if you didn't do the exercise, because this is obviously shortened and you're not being forced into this, but you were invited to go internal. You were invited to check in with yourself. Secondly, you were invited to use and share what is within you that's important to you with someone else. So there's a communication set of skills around that. And third, if you did it well, which I hope you did, you were also invited to develop listening skills, meaning presence. You were invited to show your presence to someone else, to be eye to eye, face to face with another human being where you are receiving. Right? So those are all skills that you either know well as a function of your adult competence, someone may have taught you, modeled for you. The big conclusion, which I hope is clear, is that right now, especially those of you who raised your hands, you're in the room in another degree of attention than you were before. Why? Because you're not as much just listening to me, you also came in the room in an explicit and deliberate way. And a lot of what we'll talk about in the next 45 minutes or so is how to make sure that we're thinking about teaching and learning as the art and practice of pulling kids into the room as much as is humanly possible so they're there to learn. I want to start with this image of Archimedes. Archimedes is the ancient Greek philosopher who writes over 2,000 years ago, give me a lever and a fulcrum on which to place it and I can move the world. We're here, you're here. We met this morning with the business community, with the political community, with the community-based organizations, because there is in my view at least, a moment in time. A moment where if you could picture in this globe all the faces of your students, or even the 27 different classrooms or different locations, or the 100 or so teachers you need to hire, or the kids you know you're going to be seeing coming through doors soon, and have the audacity to believe that if you've got the right tools, you can actually move their world. You can shape and move and transform the future for those children and adults who will be under your leadership. I'm going to try to make the case right now that this is a moment in time in which that's possible. It's not an easy time. The marketing people are referring to this yield sign here with an acronym now. And actually, each word in the acronym has a different meaning. VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The country, our families, our communities, our religious institutions, our social, our civic institutions, and most important for us today, our children, are growing up with a huge amount of volatility, a huge amount of uncertainty that they're seeing in you and in me, in their parents and their grandparents and their uncles, aunts, and the significant adults in their lives. They realize already at very early ages that the world is getting much more complex very rapidly, and that the path forward is ambiguous. They're not sure. We're not sure where we're headed. Now you can say, well, is this about politics? Yeah, it's about politics. Is it about technology? Also about technology. It is about families. Is it about families? Yes. Is it about race and culture and gender and sexual orientation? All of those. All of these things are built into the situation that Dallas students, these are words from your own documents, many are living in extreme poverty, high stress, high levels of anxiety, and 40 to 60% disengaged from learning by the time they reach middle school. And disengaged from learning doesn't necessarily mean getting D's and F's already, but it means they've begun already to show signs of disengaging from the social, cultural, and relational life of the school and of the content we're trying to teach them. So there's nothing easy about where we are. And there's nothing foolproof about what we're trying to accomplish. The future is hanging in a very delicate balance for our kids. But nonetheless, I believe we have a big chance. So educators, we've got some resources here, and I'm going to go through these quickly, because many of you, like me, who did teacher prep programs, who did sixth-year programs, who've done administration or doctoral programs, we've read a lot of texts that remind us that the teaching and learning enterprise is not a narrow, functional job. I'm just going to remind you of a few of them. So Binet is the guy who develops the IQ test. Right? 1916, Binet and Simon, his collaborator, write, "Success in school admits of other things than intelligence." And right away, this guy who begins the process of allowing us, whether it was a good thing or not, to sort and classify kids according to ability by IQ and then ultimately by achievement, to do the work that many of us do, whether we like it or not, to sort kids by ability level. He even says at the very beginning of the influence of intelligence testing on schools that we've got to pay attention to attention and will and character. Doesn't develop a test for them. He only develops the IQ test, but he notes that schools at their peril ignore the other dimensions of learning. Then we get to Dewey. Everybody reads Dewey, right? Everybody reads Dewey. Also, this is before 1920. Education is a it's a relational process. Okay? Education is not preparation for life, it is life, right? So we're not just telling our 14-year-olds, do what you've got to do here so you'll be ready for the future. The 14-year-old already has decided that what he or she is doing today is important because that's their life. They're not thinking about when they're 24 and 44. If we don't make it about what they're doing, the process now, the quality of the mental process, Dewey tells us, is the outcome we seek. Maria Montessori, jump ahead about 40 years, and she begins to craft schools that have this kind of a mission statement, to create an environment designed to allow the most creative of all acts, self-construction. Not acquisition, not bolting on of information, but the self-construction of desire, of hope, of dreams, of purpose, of meaning, of fulfillment. This is the mission, according to Montessori, of the school. And then we get to Vygotsky, and I put him up here because I really like the sound of his name, Vygotsky, right? It sounds so cool. But Vygotsky adds to this concept of a zone, that the child enters into a zone. The zone has both internal dimensions and relational dimensions. The child learns when the child is connecting, eyes to eyes, heart to heart, head to head, and in a relationship where the inner life of the child is finding a safe zone. All of you have been in classrooms, you've had your moments, right, when you felt, wow, my kids and me, we are in the zone. It's even like a popular expression now. But Vygotsky makes it very clear, he becomes a critical theorist later, but he makes it very clear that that's our job. Our job is to help create these zones, these moments. So I take all this out of my teacher prep program, and like many of you, and what did I do with all those things I learned and read in college and in graduate school? Pretty much almost nothing. Pretty much almost nothing. I got handed a group of 30 kids, and I was told to teach U.S. History 1. And I got handed a textbook. Now, this is before some of you were born, I'm sorry to say. But, and I would start with the Age of Discovery and get to the Civil War. That's it. Chapter 1 to chapter 15, get through it. Here are the quizzes, here are the tests. And all the Vygotsky and Dewey and Montessori and Binet and everybody else we read was out the window, and all I was trying to do was put dates on the board and hand out quizzes. So I'm frustrated. I'm 25 or 6 years old. I read a guy, Jim Comer, who's writing about school power, about the authority that exists in neighborhoods and in nested communities. He's coming from the child psychoanalytic perspective, and I go to see him, and he says to me, you've got it all wrong. Teaching and learning is a relationship. He says, you're thinking too much about content and about pushing kids. You're not thinking enough about how to cultivate the relationship. And then he goes on to say, it's a constructive act. I'm seeing a lot of people going, what is he talking about? I'm not sure if this is clear, but the idea that Comer says to me is that the teacher and the learner are actually in a constructive relationship where they are building understanding through their interaction. It's not a deductive experience. I'll say a little bit more about it. It's a constructive one. And the extent to which we create relationships that have power between adults and children, relationships as the vehicle for all learning, is the extent to which the child will learn. So he says, I was looking like a lot of you are looking like, not sure I understand. So he says, let me explain this to you. He writes on the board, what's the difference between these two shapes to a 6-year-old? 6-year-olds in class, you got the chalkboard in the front, you put these two shapes on it. What's the difference between the two? Short answer, a significant adult wants the child to know the meaning of this one. The adult does not care if the child knows the meaning of that one because the adult attributes no meaning to it. So the only reason the child begins to know the meaning of that shape is because they've bonded and connected to the adult who wants them to know it, and to the extent they haven't, they don't care. So to the extent that the relationship is already fractured and broken and adversarial, the child immediately has intuited and understood that they don't care what that adult wants them to know. Right? So this is a different way of expressing the same idea. Now, who do you picture yourself as being? I know it's a lot of white men, but forgive it's an old picture. I didn't pick it because don't get funny with me. I didn't pick it because it's white men. This is actually a presentation from a great neuroscientist. I'm going to do a little bit more on this. But the idea here is try in your head not to always think of yourself in those positions, but to remind yourself what it feels like to be in that one. Those adults didn't show, didn't tell, didn't have a textbook, didn't have a quiz to say this is how you walk down the sidewalk. They just had a connection to the child, and the child learned from there, right? So here's what Patricia Metzloff also has shown in recent studies. So this is infant studies where if you go from the upper left-hand corner, you can see, I think this is an 1-year-old, this is a 12-month-old, who can connect easily to an adult, right? Can make eye contact, can follow and engage with the adult. But what's fascinating is that when the little baby sees her attention shift, the baby doesn't stay with her, the baby goes to where she's going. But only because of the first picture will the baby do what's in the third picture, which is look to where the adult is looking. So she has another way of making this point. You can take this 9 or 10-month-old child and do about 12 units of Mandarin Chinese and figure out how far the child gets with those units. And then you do the same exact instruction. Take this same instructor with the same language and put her on a screen, on a computer, and do the same thing with children that is being done in the live setting. Guess what the percentage equivalency of the retention is from live to computer? Anybody want to take a guess? How much you think the child gets? Just as much, more, less? Take a guess. Less? I need a number. What percent is acquired through the technology, do you think? 50. Good. Okay, that's what I guessed. The answer is 0. No learning. No learning. Now you can say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense because you see these kids walking around like this all day long. They're learning something in that device. But what they've done is internalized a relationship and put it in the phone. Right? So what they're actually doing is they're communicating with someone, but they're just doing it through this handheld device. At your most intuitive level, you have no interest in the device. So here's where we live most of the time. And if you think about this, I hope this resonates, at least with some of you, that if you think about your schools, most of what we do at the unconscious level, most of what we assume is the child is coming in on a conveyor belt. We're the teacher. We grab a piece of information, a data chunk. We grab it off a conveyor belt that's been handed to us by some scholar or some expert, and we bolt it onto the brain that goes by us, and then we grab another piece and we bolt it onto the next brain, and we have a very mechanical idea embedded in our culture about what teaching and learning is. And it's wrong. So it's 100% wrong. And here's where we come out then after the Jim Comer insight combined with folks like Roger Weisberg who develop social problem-solving strategies, and Mo Elias and Mark Greenberg, scholars working on skills training. And we come to the idea that there is a body of content just like math, just like science, just like social studies, just like language arts, that can and should be taught in schools so that teachers are equipped to cultivate the relationships, inspire the inner life to grow, and connect those two to purpose and meaning and value and productivity so that the teacher becomes an architect of the art of learning that is emotional, social, and academic in one. So we develop, meaning a big, huge field, many of you in this room maybe collaborate in some ways, this idea that there are 5 parts. Imagine a similar pie chart you could put up for science where you have chemistry and physics and biology and other kinds of things. So this is the basic scope, if you will, of the new science of social and emotional learning when linked to academic learning, both through instruction in the first circle, through school-wide practices, through things like restorative justice and student agency and student participation in the life of the school, and then in family and community partnerships, begins to develop for the field, now we're back in the early 80s and then into the 90s, begins to develop for all of us as educators a new paradigm for the integration of the inner life, the relational life, and the academic tasks of schools. So it's head and heart. I'm still, when people challenge me, say, well, wait a second, how do you, I say, please show me the kid who comes into school with just their head. Please show me the adult who is sitting in this room whose emotions make no difference in terms of how much you're learning right now. There aren't any of you, right? There's no one in this room whose emotional connection with me isn't influencing, either positively or negatively, how much of this makes any sense to you, right? So there is no alternative to engaging the emotional and social life of children. So here's an example for those of you who haven't yet been and seen implementations. This is a curriculum. This is one of those things where you give the teacher a new curriculum and you ask the teacher to dedicate specific time to instructing children in these skills. And this is a 6-step problem-solving model. It begins with stop, calm down, and think before you act. Children learn stress management like the turtle. And they go through this and learn goal setting. How do you set a goal? How do you identify what your goal is? How do you define a goal? How do you work towards a goal? Do you do consequential thinking? How do you, in the abstract, manage what might be the consequences of a particular solution? Planning skills, the whole 9 yards. So I'm in Hill House High School in New Haven, Connecticut. The principal has me running an after-school group for young men in the school, high school kids, who are on the bubble, right? Kids who might drop out and might get in trouble, might have been suspended once or twice, but good kids, we think we can keep them. We start this group, and I bring this problem-solving poster after school. We meet once a week, and we plan trips and activities, and we have, discussion groups and so on. The thing is flourishing, and one day I walk into school, and the principal says, "Isn't Lamont young?" I said, "Yeah, I know Lamont." "Isn't he in your leadership group?" I said, "Yeah, he's in the group. He comes after school on Tuesdays." He said, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you he got shot last night." And I was like, "I don't think so. Could be his brother, but not him. He's doing great." He said, "Tim, he got shot 7 times, point blank." And I was just, speechless. I go down, he somehow survived that day, that night. Was in the hospital with 7 gunshot wounds. I went down to visit him. He's in a room by himself with a police officer outside the door. I walk in and, it's everybody's nightmare. Kid you love, kid that's yours, wrapped up, hanging on to life by a thread, and lines and beeps and machines and gloves and gowns, and a motionless body of a beautiful 18-year-old young man whose life has all but ended. So I did what any of you would do, which is stand there. I held his hand. I just said a few things. I don't even know what I said. I said, we're with you, and Lamont, all the guys in the leadership group are praying for you, and I just stood there quietly. And miraculously, I see his mouth start to move, and I can see that he's trying to say something, and I lean down, and he says, "Shrives." That's what the students call me by my last name. He said, "Next time, I'll use problem solving." Now, I tell this story because I want to pivot here from why this all makes sense to the urgency of quality. Because right then and there, I could tell you, yeah, I tried, with a high school senior to do some problem solving, but that wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough. It was too little, it was too late. But this is a good kid. And this is a kid who all his life wanted to do the right thing, and we as educators, me as an educator, hadn't really given him the tools necessary, honestly. We should have started earlier. We should have had much more support. We should have had much more integration. He would not have been lying there on death's door because he wanted to use problem solving. It's just that we got to him too late. Now, the end result of this story is a good one. Miraculously, Lamont survives. Don't ask me how. Don't ask him how. I ran into him last year in New Haven. I don't know if you can see this, but there we are. We took a selfie. He's a master's. He's taking a master's in clinical social work at Fordham University right now. He is a tough, beautiful young man. Oh, now he's not so young anymore, but neither am I. Then again. But this is a picture that shouldn't have to have been taken right? We should not have had to travel this journey. Now, so let me jump ahead to what this would look like in schools. First thing we heard it today. How can you ask teachers to do this? They've already overwhelmed, too much time on task, we've got tests. We did a study about a year ago. Teachers want this. So you can just assume that depending on the language needed to explain it, your teachers are hungry for the chance to engage the full life of the kid. They don't want to be told to skill and drill and force themselves into pockets of bland, dry, didactic teaching. They want the full panoply of engagement. 93%, this is nationwide, of teachers are asking for a broader focus on social and emotional learning. Maybe they know this. Recent studies show that if you do this work well, it contributes to physical health. So if you remember back to your little stress management strategy we just did a little earlier, the more stressed you are, the less healthy you're going to feel, right? You can say, obviously. But this is a powerful indicator of future lifelong physical health, the extent to which children have strong social and emotional skills. What about jobs? Aren't we supposed to be preparing kids for jobs? Yes. Strong social and emotional skills are the demand skills in employment today. At Google, the head of HR at Google told me a couple of months ago, we have everybody applying has engineering or has coding. So it's not to say that coding and engineering aren't important, they are. But the reason they hire one person and not the other has almost exclusively to do with teamwork, with independence, with the capacity to communicate, with the capacity to lead, all the social and emotional skills. This is what matters. You, I would dare say, in all likelihood were promoted to where you are today, at least in part, if not significantly, because of your social and emotional skills. Your capacity to lead and communicate with others, your capacity to lead and communicate with external audiences, your capacity to connect with kids. I'm guessing that almost none of you were promoted because of your SAT scores. Anybody here think they were promoted because of their SAT scores? I made you feel bad if you did, so I didn't mean that. But let's not dichotomize the social and relational life from the academic or the employability life. It's a false dichotomy, it's not true. What about the larger cultural problem? Income inequality, race, culture, class differences. This is a report from Brookings and the American Enterprise Institute. Super conservative, super liberal. Think tanks recommending public policy. Their joint report on income inequality from last year says that one of the 4 strategies they recommend for closing the income inequality gap in the country now, not just in your schools, in the country, is to educate the whole child and promote social, emotional, and character development. So when people say, well, we've got big economic challenges to face, we don't have time for this, wrong again. And this is not a liberal or a conservative point of view, it's a shared point of view. What about expense? We're going to go to central office, it's going to cost new money. 11-to-1 benefit to cost return. I'm going to say a little bit more about this in a minute. One of the highest benefit to cost return ratios ever calculated by Clive Belfield at Columbia University when evaluating a social intervention. So does it pay off? Not just does it pay off 1-for-1, but over 10-to-1. What about school performance? College graduation, high school graduation. This is the New York Times 2 years ago. Those kids scoring higher on social skills, more likely to graduate from college. Profound implications for educators. I'm going to go through the rest of this quickly. Here's the one that's probably most important to those of you who are facing teachers and parents in your buildings. This is a meta-analysis, 6 years old, study of over 200 programs around the country, and looking at the combined outcomes from those social and emotional learning programs. And what do they find? Improvements in skills? Yes. Improvements in attitude? Yes. Improvements in behavior and reductions in discipline referrals? Yes. But let's not make any splits here. Implement a high-quality, evidence-based social and emotional learning program, and your standardized test scores go up. Okay, so the old argument, we've got to do test scores. We can't focus on the child. We can't unlock creativity. We can't create zones of trust and support and sharing. We don't have time for that. We've got to get to the reading scores. Wrong. Attention, cultivated, nurtured, and brought out is your way to the reading scores. And we're seeing this across the country. Sherry can tell you stories of schools that have gone from 100, 150, 200 suspensions to 5 or 10 in 1 year. And I don't mean 5 or 10% reductions. I mean from 200 to 5 out of school suspensions in short windows of time when integrating classroom management skills with social and restorative practices as the whole school approach. So if you've got suspension problems and discipline problems and behavior problems and you only want to manage those, okay, fine. Trying to catch the bad kids is not the same as preventing the problems from happening. Preventing the problems from happening means equipping the kids with the skills and the adults with the skills they need to manage life. I'm going to do quickly now a more recent meta-analysis that just came out last week in Child Development Magazine. This is a new one, and it looks largely not so much at outcomes, but at longitudinal outcomes, right? So this is a study that's looked at the same kinds of programs, but as much as 18 years after intervention. So the question people ask is, well, yeah, you improved their stress management skills while they were in 6th grade, but what about in 7th grade, or what about in 10th grade, or what about in college? Is there any follow-up? Here again, I just find this fascinating. Sorry. I find this fascinating. The higher outcomes, look at where the benefit is the highest. Social behaviors, attitudes, and skills go up, but the thing that goes up the most is performance. So you teach the child stress management, and yeah, that gets better. But what really gets better is the capacity to pay attention and learn. Here's, if you're a numbers person, any numbers folks here, here's the actual cost calculated by economists of primary prevention. So if we prevent one child from dropping out of high school, one child, the value to the culture is about $367,000 of keeping that kid through high school. College, it doubles. And then you get over here, prevention of a conduct disorder. So if we equip kids with the resilient skills that are likely to reduce the chance of developing a conduct disorder, the cost, it's a $3.9 million piece of business. That's the cost to the culture over the life of the child of a conduct disorder. If we reduce conduct disorders by 10%, and these are, by the way, not with district-wide initiatives like we're describing here, but with quite small initiatives, the benefits are extraordinary as calculated by this meta-analysis. This is up, brand new on the web. These slides, if they are of use to you, make them available as you present to other audiences whenever you need them. Now, I want to put this up here just to remind us that we're in Dallas, we're in Texas, we're in the United States of America, we're in a politically divided world. And education has not been a very bipartisan conversation, at least the last many years. There's been a lot of fighting between conservatives and liberals, between business and unions and all that kind of stuff. We don't have to do that here. This is not a political agenda. I just use this. These are different languages that some different groups use. So some people talk about college and career readiness as the primary outcome. Fine, it's good. Does it sound more compatible to people who come at this from a more conservative perspective? Great. Employability skills, character, those tend to lean a little redder, whereas things like emotional intelligence and student agency and deeper learning tend to lean a little bluer. But you don't have to choose. The only thing we're interested in this field is what works for kids. It's not whether it works for kids who are red or blue or who are trying to become red or blue or rich or, it's not about that. It's not even, I dare say, it's not even about some of the other labels kids carry, because competence is the antidote to labeling. Okay, competence, developing competence for all kids helps heal our tendency as educators to start to label you as advanced or talented and gifted or special ed or poor or low socioeconomic status or from this neighborhood or whatever it is we do. Primary prevention is about developing your competence to manage and interact and live and thrive. And that's not red or blue, it's pure development. So, my conclusion from all this is that we are no longer in a situation where we can credibly, as educators, allow people to dichotomize any longer between head and heart, between social, emotional, and academic, between cognitive and non-cognitive. It's no longer a credible statement to make that we have to choose between social and emotional and academic development. Anyone, in my view, and this may sound audacious and arrogant, anyone who tells you, I don't do that, I believe should be guilty of malpractice. Now, people can say we don't know how to do it, or we're learning, or we're trying to develop our strategies, but when people say to us, as they have in the past, you shouldn't do this, as educators, we should have the strength of the evidence to say, you shouldn't speak about those things you don't know what you're talking about. Because children do not learn in a disembodied way. So, very quickly, on the issue of implementation. If you remember those circles, in each of your buildings, you will be asked, I think this year, primarily to focus on the adults, which is great. Right? Let's focus on where the adults are, what they need in order to begin to retool in some ways to be leaders in this kind of space. But when you get to the point where you're implementing in your buildings new programs or new curriculum or new professional development or new discipline strategies, keep in mind that we've got to look at this holistically. This is not a check-the-box program. Those of you who have been around as long as I have know that fads will come and go. And the new superintendent or the new deputy superintendent or the new mayor or the new governor or the new president will come and say, let's implement X. And you're supposed to say, okay, I got to implement X. What do I have to do to get them off my back so I can get back to doing what I want to do? We resist fads, rightly so. This is not a fad, this is a paradigm shift. And it will require approaching the classroom differently. It will also require that we think about school climate and culture differently, and it will also require that we think about community and family integration. Remember that problem-solving poster. If that problem-solving poster sits up in the 6th grade classroom or in a 3rd grade classroom or in a 12th grade classroom, and it's not an in-school suspension, and it's not in the Boys and Girls Club, and it's not in the hall when principals, assistant principals are monitoring, if it's only in one place, it will fail. That's what happened to Lamont. He got one little piece, but he didn't get a nested community of support. So we're going to have to think about quality implementation. We need a science of quality implementation that guides us in a paradigm-shifting approach to implementing this work. Because this is what too much of our schools look like, the one on the top. Because almost everybody in this room has at one point or another been responsible for some degree of violence prevention or human sexuality education or substance abuse or academics or character or community or health, all these things. And they come at us one after the other, and we do what we have to do to get the administrator, at least in my experience, off our backs and say we did it. And it disrupts the flow of the school, it creates chaos, it creates poor implementation, and it creates bad results. So this language at the top here is from your plan here in Dallas. You're looking for, you have 5 objectives, I think it is, 5 objectives. One is that we develop a common language in Dallas. 2 is that we have consistent practices in Dallas. 3 is that we have systematic governance to avoid fragmentation and chaos. And 4 is that what we do in SEL at school, we also share to make sure it's done at home. So the hope is that some of this stuff isn't going to go away, but a primary prevention framework and a coordinated approach will create a much more coherent, school and a much more high-quality implementation when done well. Here's one example of a school that's doing it. You probably can't read this, but this is a little elementary school in Chicago. About 30% of their kids are from homeless shelters. And what they've done is they've taken that wheel that we showed you, the self-awareness and relationship skills and self-management and decision-making, and they've put all of their programming first into self-awareness, what they're doing on social awareness, what they're doing in decision-making, what they're doing in relationship skills, and what they're doing in self-management. So it's coordinated, so the teachers can see it. It can be nested and reinforced multiply by everyone in the school. It's not this third grade teacher is doing a great job and this third grade teacher doesn't believe in it. That kind of thing. So this is just one school, and this is just poster board, as you can see. This is what they did as a nested team under the leadership of a principal and an assistant principal to make sure to avoid the kind of fragmentation that is fatal to high-quality implementation. What about academics? I haven't said much about academics, about STEM, about test scores, about SATs, except to make fun of them. Here's an example. You could say, well, what's this one subject that has no SEL in it? Math, right? Wrong. Where's the math teachers? Come on, get up. We love you. We love math teachers. Here's an example of the standards that one state is using to integrate mathematics instruction with social and emotional learning. So you can see in the third line down, they continue to improve and be successful when they make mistakes in math, right? To be conscious of that is to be self-aware. Persistence in problem solving. You have to persevere in math. There's a self-management and a grit perspective. To collaborate and learn in teams in math. To benefit from the work of other mathematicians includes social awareness and relationship skills. So effective mathematics instruction builds and integrates these same competencies when done well. This is a current framework being used in several states, and I pulled this from the website of the Massachusetts. So adults modeling, you're going to spend a year with adults, and a lot of adults are going to be saying, I got to teach math. I never have time to get through the STEM stuff. Great, continue to teach it, but begin to invite the process and the how of the teaching to pull the kids in full body into the experience. Does this make sense? I'm not sure if, I know I'm going through this stuff really quickly. Let me close with two stories here. So, and this is from kids. This is Luis Reyes Jr. I met him about 2 months ago in Cleveland. This is his senior project at Facing History High School in Cleveland. Luis read over 56 scholarly articles on police violence. So he developed the most rigorous academic report anybody in his family had ever written. It got him into college. But Luis also, at the age of 18, integrated into his scholarly pursuit the heart and soul of what was pulling his community apart. The violence that began with Tamir Rice years ago and is continuing in his city every day. And so this is the cover sheet of his obviously hand-drawn report that he was presenting to actually the Board of Education later that night. And I don't know if you can read it, but here at the bottom, there are so many cops killing our people, there are so many people killing our cops. Why can't we be equal? Let's just do a little bit of a deep read on that for a minute. Violence, what's the opposite of violence in his framing? Equality. Not nonviolence in his framing, equality. So he has already arced into a hope and a dream of a more equal world where he's treated equally, which is the means to the ending of violence, in his view. On the back, which I didn't make on the slide, he writes, I'll just read it, it's just two sentences. We're having a war within our people. Why is there so much hate and racism? Why don't we understand how important one's life is? We're taking parents from their kids and kids from their parents. They say we're all free, but yet we're all scared. So for Luis, the opposite of freedom is fear. The opposite of violence is equality. Now, I share this only to point out what I think a learner looks like, who's living into his academic life, who's living into his scholarly work, who's coming at deep academic insight with his heart and soul. He has had teachers who have invited him into the study of social studies, United States history, contemporary issues, current events, not as an abstract, bolt-on piece of information, but as a constitutive element of who he is and the country he wants to live in. To me, it's a very different worldview captured by this young man. Finally, we need to change the narrative. Too much of our narrative in education, I think, is about information, not enough about inspiration. Too much of our narrative in urban education is about deficits, and not enough is about competence and equity and inclusion. Too much of our narrative is about tests, and not enough about the integration of the whole child. We don't have to say we don't care about tests. I'm not going to stand here and say I sent my kids to school and didn't want them to learn to read. I did. I do want my kids to learn to read. I do want my kids to master science to the extent of their ability. But we don't have to pretend as though that test is the only way in which we can understand how we teach. And I'll leave you with one last example, I think, of someone capable of changing the narrative. This is Melanie Garcia. She's in Chicago. And again, just a quick, deep read of Melanie's voice. Her poem, which she presented at a room about this size of principals and supervisors in Chicago last year. Just because I'm sensitive, I'm not dramatic, I'm not fragile, I'm not weak, I'm emotionally intelligent. Listen to this child confront the world around her. So who's she talking to? Just because I'm sensitive. She's talking to her peers. She's talking to the culture. Someone has told her that being sensitive is a negative, right? Showing your vulnerability is a negative, and she's saying, no, it's not. No, sorry, it's not. It's intelligence. Just because I'm smart, I'm not lonely, I'm not loser, I'm not awkward, I'm intelligent. Who's she talking to? Is she on the playground now? Is she in the neighborhood? Is she watching the news? Is she looking at stereotypes? Is she realizing the way she's being pigeonholed as a little 10-year-old girl? Just because I'm 10, I'm not immature, I'm not helpless, I'm not worthless, I'm young. Who's she talking to? Yeah. She's talking to her teachers, she's talking to her school assistant principals, she's talking to her parents. She's talking to us. Because she's heard us say to her, hey, you're just 10. You got to wait. You don't have a voice. You listen to me. You do what you're told. And she's like, hello? What does it bother you that I'm young? Just because I'm a girl, I'm not worried about my looks, I'm not bad at sports, I am not weak. Okay, just because I'm a girl, gender roles, cultural roles, stigma. So this is a child who has already developed the internal strength to both know herself, value her own gifts, and create a better world that she wants to live in, to demand that the world respect what she believes are her gifts. I think this is a stunning piece of work myself. And I think if we could begin to capture this kind of voice when we talk about what it means to be teachers and learners, that this is our result. Believe me, this child's going to do well on tests. This child's going to college. I mean, she's 10, but I mean, we know, you've seen this child in your schools. You'll see them in a couple of weeks. You know these kids are there. Why not have it be all of them? You know, if we didn't really get it from the kids, Think about this last study. 75-year-long study, the longest longitudinal study in the world, at least as far as we know. 724 people studied, unfortunately all men. But after almost 80 years of study, most of these men are now dead. They started with them when they were teenagers. The end result of all the data analysis is that good relationships keep us happier and healthier. Tell me one person in this room who's happy if the relationships that are important to them are broken. And tell me one person who can't take on the future if they've got their relationships in good places. And yet, we at some level in schools have never been given the tools to nurture the kinds of relationship skills that will lead to a happy and healthy and productive life. I love Pharrell Williams, and I leave you with Pharrell and one last example only because I think a lot of your kids probably pay more attention to Pharrell than they do to longitudinal studies. And your kids aren't interested in Dewey or Binet or Vygotsky, but they are interested in Pharrell. And this is him on television just a few months ago. But look at his language. I mean, again, those of you who are as old as I am, you'll remember the way rock stars used to speak or pop stars used to speak. But listen to the language he's using here. Empathy and inclusion. And this isn't about politics. There's a political undertone here, and I get it, but that's not why I put it up here. I put it up here because our children have role models who are now saying, I'm choosing empathy, I'm choosing inclusion, I'm choosing love for everybody. And we wouldn't put this into a mission statement in our schools. How many people have the word love in their mission statement? My guess is anybody here, you all have mission statements in your school? Anybody have love in their mission statement? No, right? We're hard-nosed. We don't love kids. We train kids, right? We educate kids. You know, it's a Latin term. But the culture is moving and giving us some space to breathe, giving us some space to live with kids and love kids into themselves and reveal kids to themselves, to mirror to them who they can become, not just to force and train and control them. And here's sadly a picture which I wish I didn't have to show you to close. This is Scarlett Lewis, and this is her little boy Jesse. Excuse me, yes, Jesse. Jesse was killed at Sandy Hook at the age of 6. And if we wanted to, we could fill this slide with pictures. Probably could fill it with small pictures of kids in Dallas. All colors, all ages, all races, all economic backgrounds. Scarlett has dedicated her life to creating a social and emotional learning program. It's called Choosing Love. She's trying to get it evaluated because she doesn't have the funding yet, but lots of schools in Connecticut are using it. She dedicates the Choose Love curriculum to Adam Lanza, who took her son's life. Because her feeling is that anybody that was in that much pain deserves our attention. Now, that's a whole nother level. I can't even imagine. But there's a lot of moms and dads in Dallas who are living with that same concern today. And they're sending their second or their third or their fourth child to us. And whether or not they're ready to make that kind of a statement is not the point. The point is that they are, in some sense, trusting us to love their kids into becoming who they can be, not who the world or the culture or the pattern is pulling them to be. So we're at a big point, back to the beginning. We're at a big point, I believe, in the evolution of education. And I think because the evidence is so strong and because educators are so ready for something new, and because you've got such strong leadership here in Dallas, both at the school and district level, but also at the community and political level. You've got almost a unique opportunity to pivot in a dramatic way starting this year with planning and integration and thinking this all through, and then thinking yourself into a strong, evidence-based, high-quality shift to inviting the best practices that allow kids to grow and develop in optimal ways. And I hope some of this is helpful in reminding you that you have the space. You have the space to invent a new model. It's a lot of work. It's in some ways very complicated, but isn't that why we all went into education? Because for most of us, at one point or another in our lives, we made eye contact with a kid, and they looked at us, and something in us went, boom, I want that look. I want to see those eyes. And that's why we're here, so let's get after it. Thank you very much. Thank you.